Thank you for tuning in to this third episode of Rooted in Love, featuring Jim Haber, and learning about war tax resistance and what we can do to make sure we use our voice to end the injustice and genocide that continues to rampage on with our tax dollars. If you'd like to learn more about war tax resistance, you can find helpful links in the show notes, as well as more about Jim. Feel free to share this episode with a friend, subscribe, and leave a rating for future interviews. And you can follow me for updates of future episodes on Instagram at Coco Sanctuary, which is also in the show notes. Looking forward to being together again in the next episode. Until then, may you stay rooted in love. Hello, everyone. My name is Colette Ghunim, and today we are here with a very brave soul, Jim Haber, who has been leading tax resistance efforts, and we are here to learn a bit about his own journey, what he's experienced, and also any risks or challenges. We're super excited to talk more about your process and what motivated you to go down this tax resistance path. And so thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. Yes.
I'm honored. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So yeah, maybe we can start from the beginning. When did you start tax resistance? What was your motivation? If you want to go into that story.
Sure. I mean, if I date myself, I've been peace, anti-war, general activist who can't say no kind of thing since the early 80s, 1980 and all. And so I did civil disobedience at different times. Even this last weekend, I got arrested at the Nevada National Security Site, trespassing in opposition to the nuclear weapons tests they do there. So doing a bit of civil disobedience is sort of the anarchist tribe that I fell into back when I was in college. And then afterwards, I moved to San Francisco, and the anarchists became my friends. And I started living in community and running a soup kitchen in San Francisco, the Martin de Porres House of Hospitality over in the Mission District. And I lived in community for a long time. And so there is a form of tax resistance called income reduction tax resistance. It's one way to resist, because there is a limit below which you don't even have to file for that year. And so that is one option that some people take, and it helps to work, to be part of, so you're not just destitute. Some of the inspiration perhaps with the Catholic worker movement, which has sort of de-Catholicked a bit, but not. There's definitely a lot of Catholics in it, but I'm not Catholic. And but the inspiration of Dorothy Day and Peter Marin and what they started in the Depression has generated communities, and there are other communities. And if you want to do income reduction, I think it's easier that way, unless you want to live on the street or something like that. And people do that, and that people do that because they want to resist taxes or war taxes or not. But I guess I became aware of war tax resistance through the War Resisters League. And the War Resisters League is just turned 100 last year. We're in our centenary. And I got exposed to the War Resisters League in the early 80s. And I was anti-nuclear, my first focus, and then learned about environmental racism through that because of the missile tests that go from Vandenberg Air Force Base on the California coast near where I went to college, UC Santa Barbara, over to the Kwajalein Atoll in the Micronesia, and learned about the impacts of the atomic bomb tests down there and the disregard for the humanity of the people of the Marshall Islands that, was quite terrible. A movie that goes into some detail about that I recommend is Nuclear Savage. Nuclear Savage, that was a term that the Air Force referenced the people there, and that became the title of this documentary. So that brought me into the War Resisters League, and I learned about war tax resistance there and learned. So it goes back a ways.
Wow.
And so I was an income reduction tax resistor for a long time. And then when I got more gainful employment, as I left that community and was working again, I was able to put more deductions than I perhaps needed or deserved. And so that reduced what they took out of my paycheck. So
Mhm.
then at the end of the year, I actually didn't get a refund. I had a tax liability.
Oh,
So then
wow.
I could choose what to do with it.
Oh, wow.
So
Mhm.
first of all, I do recommend that people not think, oh, I want to get a big tax return. Because if you stop and think about it, you're basically giving a free loan to the government
Mm.
for all that time. Um,
Wow.
a war tax resistance counselor told me that the government doesn't actually like to have to pay all that money out in April or thereafter. So they're not big on people getting big refund checks either, which was kind of interesting.
Mhm.
But if you have a tax liability, then you could decide whether to pay or not and
Mhm.
how much you might want to withhold.
Mhm.
And um, it's easier also if you're like an independent contractor or
Mhm.
something you're supposed to file quarterly.
Mhm.
So you could file quarterly or not. And then also you could play with it that way. That's perhaps easier than if you have a regular employer and you fill out your W-2 form and it's, states they might question that. It's not really on them. Now there is some illegality involved in that, so you have to be conscious of that. But people do that, and there isn't really a lot of enforcement or any that I know of.
Okay.
We could ask the staff person at the National War Tax Resistance Coordinating Committee for more specifics if anyone has been followed. But the information that Lincoln Rice, who's that has been sharing lately, is like there was a lot more enforcement like up into the 80s, but a lot less now. So you have to expect that there will interest will accrue, and there are penalties
Mm.
that also account. And so if you don't file a false return or a frivolous
Mm.
return is a term that they use. It basically, for me, it's been like a collection process that I can ignore.
Wow.
Letters and
Wow.
telephone calls. I honestly have not gotten a telephone call in probably a couple of years. I
Mhm.
get a, I haven't gotten many letters lately, like once a year. Earlier, there was a time when I got a few and some calls. They gave it to a private collection agency. I'm jumping around a bit, but it is
Oh,
interesting when
sure.
they if you're afraid, oh, private collection agency, that sounds scary. Actually, the private collection agency can't garnish your wages or take your stuff.
Yeah.
The government can, but if they give it to a private, it's like all they can do is bug you. It's kind of like, oh, all right. But then they
Mm.
gave it back to the government. So now it is the government again. And
Okay.
I've gotten letters for the years that I've resisted saying that they could take my things, certain things, but that's common that they send those
Wow.
communiques, but they don't follow through.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
Stepping back a moment,
Mhm.
uh, there are different ways that people file and resist. I mentioned income reduction tax resistance. But if you've got some, well, Nutric and the War Resisters League have had campaigns like to get people to withhold $10.41 as a
Mhm.
symbolic withholding.
Mhm.
That's very little. So the risk is they're going to come after you, but the penalties and all that on that is not that much. It's very little.
Mhm.
They're not going to throw you in jail. And also, when you're resisting, you can always decide to pay.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
can decide to pay, and
Mhm.
that ends it. Now, there might be penalties and interest that you're also expected to pay, but it's not even crazy. It's a
Mhm.
certain amount. And again, Lincoln Rice knows how much it comes to.
Mhm.
Like, if you file
Mhm.
previous, like maybe 50 or 60 years ago, war tax resistors pressured the government, a petition won the right to include a statement of conscience, a statement of conscience with our returns and explaining why we're not paying.
Wow.
The rule is you can't write on the form itself, then they would consider it a frivolous return, and there would be an extra penalty.
Mhm.
If you include a letter of any kind with your return, it doesn't have to be in a separate envelope. You can be with your return, but it's a separate sheet of paper, though.
Mhm.
Then they just register that.
Mhm.
And when you fill out your tax return, you fill it out as accurately as you can.
Mhm.
And it says, oh, you owe $3,000 or however much, and write how much you're paying, how much you're including with your return. And some people would symbolically, if they know approximately 45% of the government budget or 50% or 65% goes to war, they might withhold that much. Other people might withhold all of it, or $100 or $10.41. You can decide, and you do what you say, and you put your letter in and you send it off. And then, the communiques that I've gotten have been, like I said, more like a collections thing,
But you've never gotten money withdrawn or like things taken in your time.
the opposite.
Oh.
After 10 years, if you have filed, 10
Mhm.
years from when they process your return for that year, if they haven't collected in 10 years, it's off the books. So I'm not sure exactly when they processed my
Oh, wow.
2013 re, but I know that in the last communique I got from them, 2012 wasn't in there anymore,
Oh,
what
wow.
I owed them. So in fact, I have gotten away with not paying taxes for some years, and it's gone.
And you are doing the full, like you did not pay any taxes, or are you doing a
Um,
percentage?
well, I have, like, currently, I have a job where I have a W-2
I
and,
see. I see. I
it's
see.
regular employment, so they do
Yes.
withhold.
Mhm.
Um, my other job is as a contractor, and I have not been paying my estimated taxes. I'm willing to say that on the record.
Mhm.
They
Mm.
know. So I'm not sure how much that penalty is, but, for underpayment, all that, I do get an account with it. Like I say, interest or, increase this year, and the
Mhm.
penalties, and then there's a balance there. And I'm like, okay. I
Mhm.
think if it gets too high, and again, Lincoln Rice at the National War Tax Resistance Coordinating Committee would have
Mhm.
more of the details.
Okay.
Beyond a certain amount, then you get into the high dollar amount.
Mhm.
If it's over 15 or $20,000, there is perhaps more chance that it'll attract attention. My
Mhm.
balance is still a little under 10,000, but
Okay.
that's not nothing. For me, I'm a low income person.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I don't, but again, you can't decide to pay. A lot of the communication that they send is like, well, contact us. We want to work it out. It's just it's like that.
Oh,
Right.
wow. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. So a lot of people are like terrified to deal with the IRS, and they're like, "Oh, you don't mess with the IRS." And so from what I'm hearing, it's not as scary as people
Right. Now they could change. They
think.
could change and decide
Mhm.
they want to come after us. And I know that a few years ago it looked like they were, able to automate uh processing and monitoring of
Mhm.
poor and low income people's much more than they were going to go after high income people. But
Mhm.
there's been some turnaround, and they have been going after the high income resistors
Wow.
recently in a way that I'm shocked,
Oh,
quite
wow.
honestly.
Like what? Like they go into their bank accounts and seize.
I'm
Yeah.
not sure that, but
Mhm.
that they're going after them at all
Oh,
is
I
actually
see. I
a
see.
turnaround.
Just that it's
The outcome, I'm not sure,
Mhm.
but
Wow.
there has been in the news in the last year. I can't remember the details of the law
Mhm.
actually, uh, but that has been happening through either presidential executive action or even Congress. I can't remember, but they've been they've been doing it,
Mhm.
and it's been interesting to see them go after the wealthy people instead of us
Wow. Wow.
for change.
And I guess, like, what do you feel like is the impact of the work, like, of the war tax resistance? Like, do you feel like it's creating a ripple effect, like that it's not going towards military aid, or is it more of just like a moralistic standpoint? How do you feel about the impact of tax resistance versus other organizing efforts?
Well, we wish it were more of a broad-based campaign, so it would be more effective, perhaps. I
Hmm.
think back in Vietnam, they instituted a telephone excise tax specifically to go to the fighting of the Vietnam War. And there was a large campaign against the telephone excise tax.
Hmm.
And so there was sort of buzz, there was energy and more people involved. It's contracted a bit. And
Hmm.
some of that is, again, people's perhaps overblown fears of the IRS. Now, that said, I don't want to diminish it for people who have been harassed in their business expenses or whatever, for some accounting error or not,
Hmm.
that they get some auditor who's just awful and
Hmm.
vindictive or something, racist, all that. I don't mean to downplay that, but
Hmm.
there have been a few war tax resistors of color, for sure. Wally and Juanita Nelson, in particular, and back in the 50s or 60s, 70s, I can't remember exactly, a while ago, 40, 50 years ago,
Hmm.
their house was taken, and then I think people bought it, went to the auction and bought it back for them because there was a whole big support. There was a broader support. So the
Wow.
people who've been doing war tax resistance for a while are very happy to meet you, Colette, and the people of We the People,
Hmm.
because it feels like you're perhaps inspiring some new life into this, what seems like a no-brainer.
Right.
We
Right.
want to work for peace. We're against war. I don't want to pay for it. But it's not the same as just, no, the government doesn't have a right to tax people, or it's not just libertarian. It
Hmm.
is more specific that we're against the war and the
Hmm.
violence. So, yeah, it's not to downplay other people's
Yeah.
philosophy or what they want to do, but this is war tax resistance. On a statewide level, last year I wanted to resist in my state taxes too because of the
Oh, wow.
prison industrial
Mhm.
warehouse slave machine. But the states tend to be way more on top
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
tracking people, and the consequences do seem even more. So when I consulted with people, it seemed that it wouldn't be that effective, and the penalties would be really perhaps more egregious than I wanted,
Hmm.
right? Or
Right.
given everything else going on.
Yes. That like there's other ways that could be even more effective to actually fight back against the prison industrial complex. For sure. For
But
sure.
one other thing I wanted to say,
Yes.
a counselor who counsels people who are having questions about war tax resistance once said, and I love this, if the government has to take it from me instead of me giving it to them, even if it's more, but they have to take it, that more truly represents the nature of the relationship. I
Woo.
like that. That stuck with me. So,
Wow. Yes. Thank you for sharing that. That's super powerful. That's true. Like this is
yeah,
not in our best interest.
I
Well,
didn't make that up, but
wow.
I like to quote
Yeah, it
it.
super resonates. Yeah, so I guess like for you, for people who are starting to get involved in learning about tax resistance, like where is the best place to start? How would you say people who are just new to to this whole world could learn and begin tax resistance, especially for this coming year? Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question. The National War Tax Resistance Coordinating Committee and the War Resisters League,
Hmm.
which has more broad base than just war tax resistance. Tax resistance is part of the War Resisters League's
Hmm.
secular pacifist history.
Hmm.
But the National War Tax Resistance Coordinating Committee is really dedicated to this particular
Hmm.
strategy. And
Hmm.
the website is nwtrcc.org.
Hmm.
So it's cumbersome, but the information there, if you're just interested in actually of minutiae of the whole tax law
Yeah.
and the IRS and how they work, it's a good resource. It's built up over the year. Some
Hmm.
really solid people been behind it. If I can name just a few names to honor them: Ruth Ben,
Hmm.
Ed Hedeman, Lincoln Rice, and I mentioned Wally and Nelson way in the past, Joanne Sheehan, great people. And they're happy to talk and figure it out. And right now, Lincoln is, if you contact Newtrick, you get Lincoln, and he really knows. He's a great communicator. You can see on their website even a War Tax Resistance 101, a video from a recent training, because people have been really interested in it. So there have been some Zoom info sessions, and one or two of those are available for viewing. And you can also communicate with them by any means you can think of, and they'll be very responsive.
Fantastic.
So the National War Tax Resistance Coordinating Committee is really, I think, the place to go.
Okay. That's great. And it's not like you have to just, once again, there's these different numbers that you don't have to not pay any of your taxes. Like you can do something more symbolic, and that it can be as powerful too.
And it's kind of nice. I have to say, each year I have to write my letter. And sometimes it's pretty similar to the previous one. I'm making them a little shorter now than I used to. But it's good for me to think about, okay, what am I doing this? And it's some of the reasons why I'm an activist who can't say no in general. So one other thing that I would also put out, because maybe people would want to join it, there used to be several war tax resistance redirection funds. Part of the ethic, and not everyone does this, not everyone files also. But if you don't file, then you don't get the 10-year thing. That's from when they process it. But there are some people who aren't going to cooperate at all, or whatever their philosophy, and they don't file. Most people put some money back into the community. So try to be constructive. I mean, Warren Buffett, all the super rich people, they like to say, well, they're giving money away. They've got their philanthropy, and so they don't want to pay taxes into the government because they know what's best, so that kind of sucks. Be nice if we all had some say. Presumably the legislative process is kind of designed, well, ostensibly it's for us as opposed to some private thing, but I feel like we get to do our little share of that if we redirect ourselves. And there are some funds that redirect, and also escrow accounts that you could pay some into. So it's out of your hands, it's not on your books, but there is a record of it. And those were started years ago. And right now there's only 2 left, one in the Bay Area and one in the Northeast. The other ones kind of aged out. And again, there wasn't a new lifeblood coming in. I think some of that, again, is the fear of the IRS made activists also leery of reaching out to different communities to talk it up. Because people are so afraid. And, we don't want to put people who are more vulnerable in a risky position by misrepresenting it in some sort of like, oh, there's no risk. It's like my experience has been mellow. I don't know of any war tax resistor of late who's been particularly hassled, but that doesn't mean they couldn't change course and decide to come after us. So I don't want to overstate but I do want to make it clear that there was someone on your Instagram page who I just today, before we talked, I did a couple of responses, and someone says, no, I don't mess with the IRS. And so I just said, well, you might want to think about it. I mean, a lot of people are more putting their bodies on the line right now.
Totally.
Than before. People are risking arrest like never before. And so you might as well consider this too. There is less consequence than getting a trespassing or a failure to disperse ticket or a misdemeanor charge. This is actually, I gotta say, less risk than being in the street, blockading a building, or gluing your hand to the front entrance of a bank. This is less risky, I think.
That's such a great point. And I feel like there's also this thing of like, our funding is going towards the suffering of so many other people. So why can't we, have like a 0.001% of difficulty or discomfort that is coming from it's like our fund that are going to that. So it's worth it, in my opinion.
So yeah, it's also interesting. I mentioned I'm Jewish. I'm an anti-Zionist Jew, and I've been to Palestine with the Center for Jewish Nonviolence, and it was surprising to me that some of the people on the trip, they wouldn't want to kind of say they were anti-Zionist because that was like too far, or supporting boycotts. And this was like before October 7th. Like people in If Not Now, the group If Not Now, they were generally not so into the boycotts and challenging the state of Israel. And If Not Now has really stepped up and joined sort of Jewish Voice for Peace. I mean this as an analogy where people getting in the street are taking bigger risks.
Yes.
So consider this, just like the If Not Now people used to not want to, well, they've just bumped up their game. They were willing to risk their bodies, but they still didn't want to risk the state of Israel. But now they're willing to kind of go a little bit more out.
Yeah, and it's this idea that like everyone has to escalate because of how severe the situation is. That it's like, okay, yes, if it's not working to call for a ceasefire, like what else do we have to do to make it stop? But yeah, that's amazing that you also got to go to Palestine. I wish more people got to actually see it on the ground, because once you see it, it's a completely different experience. The level
That
of
is the truth.
discrimination. But the other thing that I have been dealing with is that I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I've been doing a lot of events around the film that I'm currently creating. And my call to action, like when it's like, okay, what can people do to get involved? That I personally, I'm like, yes, there's the other orgs that are doing important work. And yet my heart and soul is in the tax resistance efforts. And yet I fear saying that as my number one call to action to the general public. I feel nervous because it's like, oh, she's going against the government. Like she's like a whole other level of intensity than just, oh, donate here or that kind of thing. So if you have any advice around that too, of like standing up and being like, yes, this is the way to resist.
Well, you haven't resisted yet yourself.
Correct.
Is that right?
Correct.
You're that new.
And I am scared. I am scared. Honestly, I'm like, all right, we'll see how this goes. And I'm like, yeah.
Can I ask, are you expecting to have a refund, or
No,
do you have a liability
I have a
that you can play
liability.
with?
Yes.
Okay, so you have options before you. I mean, okay.
Yes, I'm self-employed, so I will have a liability. Yeah.
Well, I think you just having that experience will be so
Right.
informative for
It's
people.
true. It's
You
true.
can dispel myths for them like you haven't before. I thought you were going to say you felt like, oh, I should be in the streets, and this isn't in the streets. This isn't radical enough. But I'm hearing you say, no, this seems way more intense, you know?
Yes.
So that's
I feel like everyone's going to protest, but not everyone is doing tax resistance. Like this
right. So
it feels like a whole
you
other.
get to be the re-vanguard.
Oh wow. No, you are paving the way. Like truly.
I'm not even vanguard, but you know, you're the re-vanguard.
Thank you. I'm just so inspired by you all for what you're doing, because I'm like, it really takes courage, because it's going against societal norms in a big, big way too. Yeah, very
Yeah, and again, I don't mean to downplay the risk, you know, that if someone has a bad experience, oh, that guy said it was, you know, it's a piece of cake, you know, but you know, it doesn't feel as much risk for me as it used to, and I don't know. It's
Yeah, I've been hearing that from
again,
talking to other resistors
so
too, that they're like, yeah, the last person who's gone to jail was like one person like 30 years ago or something like that, that it's just not at the level of what we're thinking. Okay, I think the last question on my end is just around like what your grand vision would be if there was a mass of people that were doing this tax resistance efforts. What do you feel like it would shift, or like, yeah, what would you say is that like ultimate goal for tax resistance?
God, if they noticed more,
Yeah.
if they noticed more, they felt it. That would be so rewarding if enough people did it, even if it's not huge dollar amounts, but numbers of people doing symbolic amounts. I know that the tax blackout call is 5%, right? Which is sort of a tithing. If you think of tithing, 5%, 3%, 10%, those are often numbers people throw out. So you could think about you're doing your tithing as a resistance from the war machine, and you're still giving it away somehow. Numbers more than dollar amount might be a really effective way of getting broader attention. And again, if we do symbolic amounts, that's not going to attract the people who are just interested in the fraud or the evasion or the social good. It
True.
would be making a statement. So this is actually the first time I really thought about this. On some level, the symbolic war tax resistance might be more impactful than just refusing it all and saying, no, 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 because more people will do that
Right, right.
symbolic amount because the risk is a lot less. And again, they're happy if you decide to pay. They are happy and they'll take your money if
Yes.
you give it to them.
Yes. Like, okay, we forgive you. Thank you very much. Oh,
We have a little tip, though. We
right,
need a little
right,
tip.
right,
Yeah.
right. Oh boy. Wow. Well, thank you so much. Are there any other tips, advice, considerations that you feel are important to share?
No, just to reiterate that people in the National War Tax Resistance Coordinating Committee were wondering what was going to happen. Who are we going to pass this on to, or who's going to carry this forward? And I think we, the people in the tax blackout, has given us a sense of rededication. So thank you. Thank you very much. And I hope that your efforts and ours as
Yeah.
we join in this just
Yeah.
blossoms and like we just talked about and get noticed more. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. I appreciate you so much. What a beautiful soul. Truly. You're living your
Colette, great
value.
to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And everyone, resist. Vive
Yes.
la huelga, or let's
Yeah.
stand together.
I love that.
La lucha continua.
SOS.
Use my broken Spanish.
I love it. Great. All right. Well, thank you.
In the second part of a two-part series, we speak on the power of war tax resistance with longtime tax resister Jim Haber. We speak about his own motivations for resisting his taxes going towards the industrial military complex, any risks involved, and how to become a war tax resistor yourself. Thank you for joining us to expand your mind and open your heart towards our collective liberation. This is Rooted in Love.